Good evening. How's everybody doing? All right. Well, first of all, I accept this award on behalf of the hardworking federal IT community, from the CIOs to IT project managers on the front lines, to those people on a day-to-day basis that are actually doing the hard work to make sure that we effectively serve the American people. What I'd like to do today is actually reflect on the last 2.5 years. And I'd like to begin by taking you back to November of 2008, when President Obama was elected. I recall distinctly getting the call to actually serve on the transition team, and I was honored to be part of a very dynamic transition team. And the president had run on the message of changing the way Washington works. And I could see in the president that he really believed and got what the power of technology really is and how it can be used to improve the lives of everyday Americans. So we got together in this nondescript building in Washington, D.C., and were fueled by coffee, dreaming up big ideas in terms of how we're going to change the public sector. We talked about how we had to crack down on wasteful spending because we saw billions of dollars thrown away, hard-earned taxpayer dollars thrown away when it came to information technology projects. We wanted to make sure that we were actually tapping into the ingenuity of the American people, because we recognized that the federal government does not and did not have a monopoly on the best ideas. How do we engage the American people? How do we make sure that we create a more open, transparent, and participatory democracy where people are not treated as subjects, but people are actually co-creators of value across the board? We wanted to make sure that from a security perspective, that we're advancing policies and we're moving to an era where we're actually going to address some of the toughest issues that faced us when it comes to cybersecurity, especially in the context of nation states that are building offensive capabilities. And as we looked at the rise of cybercrime across the board, we knew that we had to fundamentally rethink the role of cybersecurity. And we also knew that we had to come in on day one and make sure that we were looking at some of the efficiency and effectiveness across the federal government and looking at ratios from something as simple as what is a ratio of a user to dollars being spent on something as simple as email or ID cards, or infrastructure. What is a percentage we're spending on infrastructure, and what value are we deriving out of it? Well, let me take you back to the first day as the administration took over. The Washington Post said that if the Obama campaign represented a sleek, new iPhone kind of future, the first day of the Obama administration looked more like the rotary dial phone. And the reality is, we walked into an office, and the first day I walked in, I was handed a stack of PDF documents that were made up of $27 billion worth of IT projects that were years behind schedule, millions of dollars over budget. And everybody I would talk to would say that, look, this is a huge enterprise. You can't really drive a lot of change. And frankly, government employees across the board are not really going to be willing to drive a lot of this change. So you've got to accept the status quo. Having served in Arlington County, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the District of Columbia, I rejected that view because I knew there was actually the career employees across the public sector that were driving change day in and day out, and that we had to be able to tap into their collective spirit to make sure that we're moving forward and advancing an agenda that actually made sense. So what we decided to do is said, look, we're going to think of this new model, new era of how we deploy technology, and with the leadership that was coming from the top, from the President of the United States, it was critical that we fundamentally rethink the way we're deploying this technology. When it came to the $80 billion in the last 2.5 years, what we've been able to do is save $3 billion by simply terminating IT projects that weren't working or turning around projects that were behind schedule or over budget. The only time that used to happen is if they made headlines in the New York Times or the Washington Post. When it came to tapping into the ingenuity of the American people, we launched platforms like recovery.gov, or we launched platforms like data.gov, for example. And we started with a minimum viable product. When data.gov launched, it launched with 47 data sets. Today, we have over 389,000 data sets. More impressive than that is that we worked with Congress and were able to change law to enable competitions, money for competitions. The America Competes Act. Now, every single agency can put forward a competition that will allow third-party developers, the American people, to help create applications that the government doesn't have to create. We already have 236 applications that have been created. There are dozens of countries around the world that are now implementing the data.gov platform. It is a global phenomenon. It's a global movement. And we're fundamentally rethinking how we even buy software as a result of that, so we're not constrained to just the old model of procurement, whether it's through grants or the multi-year procurement cycles that we engage in. We're seeing unbelievable innovation as a result of this platform. When it comes to security, we worked very hard across the board to make sure that we're advancing a comprehensive model legislation before Congress. For the first time, we've put forward comprehensive legislation, and we're working very closely with Congress to make sure that we enact that. From protecting our federal systems to national security to critical infrastructure, we take on some of the toughest issues. Everything from making sure, when it comes to privacy and protecting the privacy of the American people, that we move away from an era of a patchwork of 50+ state laws that confuse the consumers and the private sector, but bring more certainty into that space, to making sure when we think about our national security that we've taken the appropriate steps to protect our vital interests. The other area that we're really focused on was to look at an area that a lot of people never really paid attention to because it may have been boring or it may have taken too much hard work, which was to look at how are we really spending money on infrastructure. We realized that we're spending out of that $80 billion, $24 billion a year on IT infrastructure. Yet, when we looked at our asset utilization, we found that we went from 432 data centers to over 2,000 data centers in the span of a decade, with average utilization of those servers under 27%, average utilization of memory under 40%. We decided to take that problem head on, and we're shutting down 800 data centers. We've already shut down 39, and we're going to finish shutting down 137 of these data centers this calendar year. On top of that, we shifted. One of the biggest transformations in the public sector is our cloud-first policy. And we're already benefiting tremendously in terms of saving money, but more important than just saving money as we've shifted to cloud-first policy is actually moving to 100% utilization of technology that we buy. Think about how many times in the United States government we buy, whether it's software or hardware, and it could take us months or years before we use anything, we get any value. In some cases, like at the Department of Defense, when we were implementing dimers, we spent 12 years and $1 billion and nothing worked. At the Veterans Administration, a financial system that was started in 1998, terminated in 2005, restarted in 2006, and terminated again in 2010 because it didn't work. The reason we're moving to cloud first is not because it's a hot trend or it's a sexy new technology. It's because it rejects the view of federal IT and the ecosystem the way it's constructed today and says, look, enough. We're not going to waste taxpayer dollars. That is why we halted $20 billion worth of financial systems last year. That is one of the reasons we've said that we need to be able to get 100% functionality day number one. We don't need to wait years to get functionality. We need to be able to use the product the day we actually buy it. And I'm glad to see companies like SAP are stepping up to the challenge and bringing into the marketplace technologies that are going to be game changers. But what's most impressive about what we've been able to accomplish in the last 2.5 years is actually the work we've also done with TechAmerica in terms of reforming federal IT management. It's not that this administration is any smarter than administrations that preceded us. It's that there have been structural barriers that get in the way of consistent execution. When you're budgeting IT 2 years out, yet the technology cycles move much faster than that, every 6 months. The joke is that, as we were talking to Deputy Secretary Bill Lynn, that in 2 years he gets a budget and Steve Jobs gets a new iPhone. We can't continue and innovate and win when those are some of the barriers that we lead with. When it comes to program managers across the federal government, we have a tendency to pluck people out without any training, without any formal certification, without investing in the people, and we tell them, well, you did really well on a $1 million project, here's a $300 million project, good luck. And when it fails, we somehow pretend like we didn't know what happened. When it comes to the private sector and the public sector, we freeze conversations and create an environment where contracting officers' incentives are only not to go to jail, and the private sector is trying to meet with government officials to say, look, here's the greatest breakthrough. But nobody's meeting with them because some of the government officials have been stuck in the 1980s because they're too afraid of the rules and regulations. And we've changed that by demystifying the procurement processes. But what I'm most excited about is actually on the human capital side. And I think the real recipients of this award have to be the people who are on the front lines, people who are making a difference on a day-to-day basis. That is why when I was talking to Phil, what we decided to say is we focus too much on what's not working in the federal government. We need to focus on what is working, and we need to recognize some of the best people in the United States government. I have the honor today of actually issuing the first Program Manager of the Year award. We've never done this before. This is the first time we're doing it at TechAmerica. I want to invite up Chris Malowick, who is the Program Manager of the Year. He's responsible for the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative at the Department of Homeland Security. His great accomplishment is that this is a $1.6 billion program that's on time and it's on budget. And what's really, really exciting about what Chris has been able to do is that this is actually the first fully implemented 9/11 Commission recommendation for border control. It enhances the security while still facilitating the flow of travelers and trade across our borders. Chris actually started his public service career in the Navy as an active duty flight officer in 1982, and then moved to civilian side in 1991 at the US Customs Service. We need more Chris's in the United States government, and that is why, as part of our reform agenda, we formally created a career track that is now up and running thanks to the leadership at OPM, and we're working with universities across the country to make sure that we're actually providing the program managers who are managing these multi-billion-dollar programs across the federal government with the vital skills. But I want to see more Chris's in the United States government, and I think he's going to scale some of the best practices in a $1.6 billion program that should be the norm, but unfortunately is the exception. Congratulations, and thank you very much for your service to the country.